Chapter 22. It was 6 o'clock already, and so, in order to be there quickly, and at the same time not to drive with his own horses, known to everyone, Vronsky got into Yashvin's hired fly, and told the driver to drive as quickly as possible. It was a roomy, old-fashioned fly, with seats for four. He sat in one corner, stretched his legs out on the front seat, and sank into meditation. A vague sense of the order into which his affairs had been brought, a vague recollection of the friendliness and flattery of Serpuhovsky, who had considered him a man that was needed, and most of all the anticipation of the interview before him, all blended into a general joyous sense of life. This feeling was so strong that he could not help smiling. He dropped his legs, crossed one leg over the other knee, and taking it in his hand, felt the springy muscle of the calf, where it had been grazed the day before by his fall, and leaning back, he drew several deep breaths. "I'm happy, very happy," he said to himself. He had often before had this sense of physical joy in his own body, but he had never felt so fond of himself, of his own body, as at that moment. He enjoyed the slight ache in his strong leg. He enjoyed the muscular sensation of movement in his chest as he breathed. The bright, cold August day, which had made Anna feel so hopeless, seemed to him keenly stimulating, and refreshed his face and neck that still tingled from the cold water. The scent of brilliantine on his whiskers struck him as particularly pleasant in the fresh air. Everything he saw from the carriage window, everything in that cold, pure air, in the pale light of the sunset, was as fresh and gay and strong as he was himself. The roofs of the houses shining in the rays of the setting sun, the sharp outlines of fences and angles of buildings, the figures of passers-bys, the fields with evenly drawn furrows of potatoes, and the slanting shadows that fell from the houses and trees and bushes, and even from the rows of potatoes. Everything was bright like a pretty landscape just finished and freshly varnished. Get on," he said to the driver, putting his head out of the window and pulling a 3-ruble note out of his pocket. He handed it to the man as he looked round. The driver's hand fumbled with something at the lamp, the whip cracked, and the carriage rolled rapidly along the smooth high road. "I want nothing but this happiness," he thought, staring at the bone button of the bell in the space between the windows, and picturing to himself Anna just as he had seen her the last time. "And as I go on, I love her more and more. Here's the garden of the Vrede villa. Whereabouts will she be? Where? How? Why did she fix on this place to meet me? And why does she write in Betsy's letter?" he thought, wondering now for the first time at it. But there was now no time for wonder. He called to the driver to stop before reaching the avenue, and opening the door, jumped out of the carriage as it was moving, and went into the avenue that led up to the house. There was no one in the avenue, but looking round to the right he caught sight of her. Her face was hidden by a veil, but he drank in with glad eyes the special movement in walking, peculiar to her alone, the slope of the shoulders and the setting of the head, and at once a sort of electric shock ran all over him. He felt conscious of himself from the springy motions of his legs to the movements of his lungs as he breathed, and something set his lips twitching. Joining him, she pressed his hand tightly. "You're not angry that I sent for you? I absolutely had to see you," she said, and the serious and set line of her lips, which he saw under the veil, transformed his mood at once. I angry? But how have you come? Where from? Never mind, she said, laying her hand on his. Come along, I must talk to you. He saw that something had happened, and that the interview would not be a joyous one. In her presence he had no will of his own. Without knowing the grounds of her distress, he already felt the same distress unconsciously passing over him. What is it? What? He asked her, squeezing her hand with his elbow and trying to read her thoughts in her face. She walked on a few steps in silence, gathering up her courage. Then suddenly she stopped. I did not tell you yesterday, she began, breathing quickly and painfully, that coming home with Alexey Alexandrovich, I told him everything. Told him I could not be his wife, and I told him everything. He heard her, unconsciously bending his whole figure down to her, as though hoping in this way to soften the hardness of her position for her. But directly she had said this, he suddenly drew himself up, and a proud and hard expression came over his face. Yes, that's better, 1,000 times better. I know how painful it was, he said. But she was not listening to his words. She was reading his thoughts from the expression of his face. She could not guess that that expression arose from the first idea that presented itself to Vronsky, that a duel was now inevitable. The idea of a duel had never crossed her mind, and so she put a different interpretation on this passing expression of hardness. When she got her husband's letter, she knew then at the bottom of her heart that everything would go on in the old way, and she would not have the strength of will to forego her position, to abandon her son, and to join her lover. The morning spent at Betsy Vronsky's had confirmed her still more in this. But this interview was still of the utmost gravity for her. She hoped that this interview would transform her position and save her. If, on hearing this news, he were to say to her resolutely, passionately, without an instant's wavering, "Throw up everything and come with me," she would give up her son and go away with him. But this news had not produced what she had expected in him. He simply seemed as though he were resenting some affront. It was not in the least painful to me. It happened of itself, she said irritably. And see, she pulled her husband's letter out of her glove. I understand, he interrupted her, taking the letter, but not reading it, and trying to soothe her. The one thing I longed for, the one thing I prayed for, was to cut short this position, so as to devote my life to your happiness. Why do you tell me that? She said. Do you suppose I can doubt it? If I doubted... Who's that coming? Said Vronsky, suddenly pointing to two ladies walking towards them. Perhaps they know us. And he hurriedly turned off, drawing her after him into a side path. Oh, I don't care, she said. Her lips were quivering, and he fancied that her eyes looked with strange fury at him from under the veil. I tell you that's not the point. I can't doubt that, but see what he writes to me. Read it. She stood still again. Again, just as at the first moment of hearing of her rupture with her husband, Vronsky, on reading the letter, was unconsciously carried away by the natural sensation aroused in him by his own relation to the betrayed husband. Now, while he held his letter in his hands, he could not help picturing the challenge which he would most likely find at home today or tomorrow, in the duel itself, in which, with the same cold and haughty expression that his face was assuming at this moment, he would await the injured husband's shot, after having himself fired into the air. And at that instant there flashed across his mind the thought of what Serpuhovsky had said to him, and what he had himself been thinking in the morning, that it was better not to bind himself, and he knew that this thought he could not tell her. Having read the letter, he raised his eyes to her, and there was no determination in them. She saw at once that he had been thinking about it before, by himself. She knew that whatever he might say to her, he would not say all he thought. And she knew that her last hope had failed her. This was not what she had been reckoning on. "You see the sort of man he is," she said with a shaking voice. "Forgive me, but I rejoice at it," Vronsky interrupted. "For God's sake, let me finish," he added, his eyes imploring her to give him time to explain his words. "I rejoice because things cannot possibly remain as he supposes." "Why can't they?" Anna said, restraining her tears, and obviously attaching no sort of consequence to what he said. She felt that her fate was sealed. Vronsky meant that after the duel, inevitable, he thought, things could not go on as before, but he said something quite different. "It can't go on. I hope that now you will leave him. I hope," he was confused and he reddened, "that you will let me arrange and plan our life. Tomorrow," he was beginning. She did not let him go on. "But my child," she shrieked, "you see what he writes? I should have to leave him, and I can't and won't do that." "But for God's sake, what is better? Leave your child, or keep up this degrading position?" "To whom is it degrading?" "To all, and most of all to you." "You say degrading. Don't say that. Those words have no meaning for me," she said in a shaking voice. She did not want him now to say what was untrue. She had nothing left her but his love, and she wanted to love him. "Don't you understand that from the day I loved you, everything has changed for me? For me there is one thing and one thing only, your love. If that's mine, I feel so exalted, so strong, that nothing can be humiliating to me. I am proud of my position, because proud of being proud." She could not say what she was proud of. Tears of shame and despair choked her utterance. She stood still and sobbed. He too felt something swelling in his throat and twitching in his nose, and for the first time in his life he felt on the point of weeping. He could not have said exactly what it was that touched him so. He felt sorry for her, and he felt that he could not help her, and with that he knew he was to blame for her wretchedness, and that he had done something wrong. "Is not divorce possible?" he said feebly. She shook her head, not answering. "Couldn't you take your son and still leave him?" "Yes, but it all depends on him. Now I must go to him," she said shortly. Her presentiment that all would go on again in the old way had not deceived her. "On Tuesday I shall be in Petersburg, and everything can be settled." "Yes," she said, "but don't let's talk about it any more." Anna's carriage, which she had sent away in order to come back to the little gate of the reed garden, drove up. Anna said goodbye to Vronsky and drove home. Chapter 23. On Monday there was the usual sitting of the commission of the 2nd of June. Alexey Alexandrovitch walked into the hall where the sitting was held, greeted the members and the president, as usual, and sat down in his place, putting his hand on the papers laid ready before him. Among those papers lay the necessary evidence and a rough outline of the speech he intended to make. But he did not really need these documents. He remembered every point, and did not think it necessary to go over in his own memory what he would say. He knew that when the time came, and when he saw his enemy facing him, and studiously endeavoring to assume an expression of indifference, his speech would flow of itself better than he could prepare it now. He felt that the import of his speech was of such magnitude that every word of it would have weight. Meantime, as he listened to the usual report, he had the most innocent and inoffensive air. No one, looking at his white hands with their swollen veins and long fingers, so softly stroking the edges of the white paper that lay before him, and at the air of weariness with which his head dropped on one side, would have suspected that in a few minutes a torrent of words would flow from his lips that would arouse a fearful storm, set the members shouting and attacking one another, and force the president to call for order. When the report was over, Alexey Alexandrovitch announced in his subdued, delicate voice that he had several points to bring before the meeting in regard to the commission of the reorganization of the native tribes. All attention was turned upon him. Alexey Alexandrovitch cleared his throat, and not looking at his opponent, but selecting, as he always did while he was delivering his speeches, the first person sitting opposite him, an inoffensive little old man, who never had any opinion of any sort in the commission, and began to expound his views. When he reached the point about the fundamental and radical law, his opponent jumped up and began to protest. Stremov, who was also a member of the commission and also stung to the quick, began defending himself, and altogether a stormy sitting followed. But Alexey Alexandrovitch triumphed, and his motion was carried. 3 new commissions were appointed, and the next day in a certain Petersburg circle nothing else was talked of but this sitting. Alexey Alexandrovitch's success had been even greater than he had anticipated. Next morning, on Tuesday, Alexey Alexandrovitch, on waking up, recollected with pleasure his triumph on the previous day, and he could not help smiling, though he tried to appear indifferent, when the chief secretary of his department, anxious to flatter him, informed him of the rumors that had reached him concerning what had happened in the commission. Absorbed in business with the chief secretary, Alexey Alexandrovitch had completely forgotten that it was Tuesday, the day fixed by him for the return of Anna Arkadyevna, and he was surprised and received a shock of annoyance when a servant came in to inform him of her arrival. Anna had arrived in Petersburg early in the morning. The carriage had been sent to meet her in accordance with her telegram, and so Alexey Alexandrovitch might have known of her arrival. But when she arrived, he did not meet her. She was told that he had not yet gone out, but was busy with his secretary. She sent word to her husband that she had come, went to her own room, and occupied herself in sorting out her things, expecting he would come to her. But an hour passed, and he did not come. She went into the dining room on the pretext of giving some directions, and spoke loudly on purpose, expecting him to come out there. But he did not come, though she heard him go to the door of his study as he parted from the chief secretary. She knew that he usually went quickly to his office, and she wanted to see him before that, so that their attitude to one another might be defined. She walked across the drawing room and went resolutely to him. When she went into his study, he was in official uniform, obviously ready to go out, sitting at a little table on which he rested his elbows, looking dejectedly before him. She saw him before he saw her, and she saw that he was thinking of her. On seeing her, he would have risen, but changed his mind, and his face blushed, a thing Anna had never seen before, and he got up quickly and went to meet her, looking not at her eyes, but above them at her forehead and her hair. He went up to her, took her by the hand, and asked her to sit down. "I am very glad you have come," he said, sitting down beside her, and obviously wishing to say something. He stuttered. Several times he began to speak, but stopped. In spite of the fact that, preparing for meeting him, she had schooled herself to despise and reproach him, she did not know what to say to him, and she felt sorry for him. And so the silence lasted for some time. "Is Seryosa quite well?" he said, and not waiting for an answer, he added, "I shan't be dining at home today. I have to go out directly." "I had thought of going to Moscow," she said. "No, you did quite right to come," he said, and was silent again. Seeing that he was powerless to begin the conversation, she began. "Alexey Alexandrovitch," she said, looking at him and not dropping her eyes under his persistent gaze at her hair, "I'm a guilty woman. I'm a bad woman. But I am the same as I was, as I told you then, and I have come to tell you that I can change nothing. I have asked you no question about that," he said all at once, resolutely and with hatred, looking her straight in the face. "That was as I had supposed." Under the influence of anger, he apparently regained complete possession of all his faculties. "But as I told you then, and have written to you," he said, in a thin, shrill voice, "I repeat now that I am not bound to know this. I ignore it. Not all wives are so kind as you, to be in such a hurry to communicate such agreeable news to their husbands." He laid special emphasis on the word agreeable. "I shall ignore it so long as the world knows nothing of it, so long as my name is not disgraced. And so I simply inform you that our relations must be just as they have always been, and that only in the event of your compromising me I shall be obliged to take steps to secure my honor." "But our relations cannot be the same as always," Anna began in a timid voice, looking at him with dismay. When she saw once more those composed gestures, heard that shrill, sarcastic voice, her aversion for him extinguished her pity for him, and she felt only afraid. But at all cost she wanted to make clear her position. "I cannot be your wife while she began. He laughed, a cold, malignant laugh. The manner of life you have chosen is reflected, I suppose, in your ideas. I have too much respect or contempt, or both. I respect your past and despise your present, that I was far from the interpretation you put on my words. Anna sighed and bowed her head. Though indeed I fail to comprehend how, with the independence you show, he went on, getting hot, announcing your infidelity to your husband and seeing nothing reprehensible in it, apparently, you can see anything reprehensible in performing a wife's duties in relation to your husband. Alexey Alexandrovitch, what is it you want of me? I want you not to meet that man here, and to conduct yourself so that neither the world nor the servants can reproach you. Not to see him. That's not much, I think. And in return, you will enjoy all the privileges of a faithful wife without fulfilling her duties. That's all I have to say to you. Now it is time for me to go. I'm not dining at home. He got up and moved towards the door. Anna got up too. Bowing in silence, he let her pass before him. Chapter 24. The night spent by Levin on the haycock did not pass without results for him. The way in which he had been managing his land revolted him and had lost all attraction for him. In spite of the magnificent harvest, never had there been, or at least never had it seemed to him, that there had been so many hindrances and so many quarrels between him and the peasants as that year. And the origin of these failures and this hostility was now perfectly comprehensible to him. The delight he had experienced in the work itself, in the consequent greater intimacy with the peasants, the envy he felt of them, of their life, of the desire to adopt that life, which had been to him that night not a dream but an intention, the execution of which he had thought out in detail, all this had so transformed his view of the farming of the land as he had managed it, that he could not take his former interest in it, and could not help seeing that unpleasant relation between him and the work-people which was the foundation of it all. The herd of improved cows, such as Baba, the whole land plowed over and enriched, the 9 level fields surrounded with hedges, the 240 acres heavily manured, the seed sown in drills, and all the rest of it. It was splendid if only the work had been done for themselves, or for themselves and their comrades, people in sympathy with them. The herd of improved cows, such as Papa, the whole land plowed over and enriched, the 9 level fields surrounded with hedges, the 240 acres heavily manured, the seed sown in drills, and all the rest of it. It was all splendid if only the work had been done for themselves, or for themselves and their comrades, people in sympathy with them. But he saw clearly now. His work on a book of agriculture, in which the chief element in husbandry was to have been the laborer, greatly assisted him in this, that the sort of farming he was carrying on was nothing but a cruel and stubborn struggle between him and the laborers, in which there was on one side, his side, a continual intense effort to change everything to a pattern he considered better. On the other side, the natural order of things. And in this struggle, he saw that with immense expenditure of force on his side, and with no effort or even intention on the other side, all that was attained was that the work did not go to the liking of either side, and that splendid tools, splendid cattle, and land were spoiled with no good to anyone. Worst of all, the energy expended on this work was not simply wasted. He could not help feeling now, since the meaning of the system had become clear to him, that the aim of his energy was a most unworthy one. In reality, what was the struggle about? He was struggling for every farthing of his share, and he could not help it, for he had only to relax his efforts, and he would not have the money to pay his laborers' wages, while they were only struggling to be able to do their work easily and agreeably, that is to say, as they were used to doing it. It was for his interest that every laborer should work as hard as possible, and that while doing so he should keep his wits about him, so as to not break the winnowing machines, the horse rakes, the thrashing machines, that he should attend to what he was doing. What the laborer wanted was to work as pleasantly as possible, with rests, and above all, carelessly and heedlessly, without thinking. That summer, Levin saw this at every step. He sent the men to mow some clover for hay, picking out the worst patches where the clover was overgrown with grass and weeds and of no use for seed. Again and again they mowed the best acres of clover, justifying themselves by the pretense that the bailiff had told them to do it, and trying to pacify him with the assurance that it would be splendid hay. But he knew that it was owing to those acres being easier to mow. He sent out a hay machine for pitching the hay. It was broken at the first row, because it was dull work for a peasant to sit on the seat in front with the great wings waving about him. And he was told, "Don't trouble, your honor. Sure, the women folks will pitch it quick enough." The plows were practically useless, because it never occurred to the laborer to raise the share when he turned the plow, and forcing it round, he strained the horses and tore up the ground, and Levin was begged not to mind about it. The horses were allowed to stray into the wheat, because not a single laborer would consent to be night watchman, and in spite of orders to the contrary, the laborers insisted on taking turns for night duty, and Ivan, after working all day long, fell asleep, and was very penitent for his fault, saying, "Do what you will to me, your honor." They killed 3 of the best calves by letting them into the clover aftermath without care as to their drinking, and nothing would make the men believe that they had not been blown out by the clover. And they told him, by way of consolation, that one of his neighbors had lost 112 head of cattle in 3 days. All this happened not because anyone felt ill will to Levin or his farm. On the contrary, he knew that they liked him. They thought him a simple gentleman, their highest praise. But it happened simply because all they wanted was to work merrily and carelessly, and his interests were not only remote and incomprehensible to them, but fatally opposed to their most just claims. Long before, Levin had felt dissatisfaction with his own position in regard to the land. He saw where his boat leaked, but he did not look for the leak, perhaps purposely deceiving himself. Nothing would be left him if he lost faith in it. But now he could deceive himself no longer. The farming of the land, as he was managing it, had become not merely unattractive, but revolting to him, and he could take no further interest in it. To this now was joined the presence, only 25 miles off, of Kitty Sherpatskaya, whom he longed to see and could not see. Darya Alexandrovna Oblonskaya had invited him, when he was over there, to come with the object of renewing his offer to her sister, who would, so she gave him to understand, accept him now. Levin himself had felt that, on seeing Kitty, that he had never ceased to love her, but He could not go to the Vronskys knowing she was there. The fact that he had made her an offer, and she had refused him, had placed a barrier between her and him. I can't ask her to be my wife merely because she can't be the wife of the man she wanted to marry, he said to himself. The thought of this made him cold and hostile towards her. I should not be able to speak to her without a feeling of reproach. I could not look at her without resentment, and she will only hate me all the more, as she's bound to. And besides, how can I now, after what Darya Alexandrovna told me, go to see them? Can I help showing that I know what she told me? And me to go magnanimously to forgive her and have pity on her? Me go through a performance before her of forgiving and deigning to bestow my love upon her? What induced Darya Alexandrovna to tell me that? By chance I might have seen her, then everything would have happened of itself. But as it is, it's out of the question, out of the question. Darya Alexandrovna sent him a letter, asking him for a side saddle for Kitty's use. I'm told you have a side saddle, she wrote to him. I hope you will bring it over yourself. This was more than he could stand. How could a woman of any intelligence, of any delicacy, put her sister in such a humiliating position? He wrote 10 notes and tore them all up, and sent the saddle without any reply. To write that he would go was impossible because he could not go. To write that he could not come because something prevented him, or that he would be away, was still worse. He sent the saddle without an answer, and with a sense of having done something shameful, he handed over the now revolting business of the estate to the bailiff, and set off the next day to a remote district to see a friend who had splendid marshes for grouse in his neighborhood, and who had written lately to ask him to keep a long-standing promise to come and stay with him. The grouse marsh in the Vronsky district had long tempted Levin, but he had continually put this visit off on account of his work on the estate. Now he was glad to get away from the neighborhood of the Shtcherbatskys, and still more from his farm work, especially on a shooting expedition, which always in trouble served as the best consolation.